If you've ever driven through the American South, there's a good chance you've passed through Alabama. And if you have, you already know there's something different about this place, something that pulls at you, something layered and complex, beautiful and painful all at once. Alabama is a state that contains multitudes. It is home to some of the most dramatic natural landscapes in the eastern United States. It is a place where American history was shaped, tested, broken, and reforged. It is a state where rockets were built that took human beings to the moon, and where ordinary men and women stood up against injustice and changed the course of a nation. In this video, we are going to explore 100 remarkable facts about Alabama, covering its geography, its nature, its history, its culture, its people, and everything in between. Whether you were born in Birmingham or have never set foot in the state, by the end of this video, you are going to know Alabama in a whole new way. Covering where Alabama sits on the map, what its land and water and wildlife look like, and the deep historical roots that have made it one of the most significant states in the entire country. Let's begin. Fact number 1. Alabama became the 22nd state admitted to the United States of America on December the 14th, 1819. To put that into context, the country had only been officially independent for 43 years at that point. The original 13 colonies had grown. The frontier had been pushed westward. East Alabama, carved out of land that had been home to Native Americans for thousands of years, was formally welcomed into the Union just over 2 centuries ago. It was a moment of great political fanfare, though the land's long and complicated human story stretched back far, far deeper than that single date on a calendar. Fact number 2. The state capital of Alabama is Montgomery. Situated in the central part of the state along the banks of the Alabama River, Montgomery has served as the seat of state government since 1846. But Montgomery is far more than a political center. It is a city that has sat at the crossroads of some of the most defining events in American history. From the founding of the Confederacy to the Montgomery bus boycott, this city has witnessed moments that changed the country permanently. We'll come back to those stories in much greater depth later in this series because they deserve every second of attention we can give them. Fact number 3. Alabama's most recognized nickname is the Heart of Dixie. You'll see it on the state's license plates and hear it in song lyrics and see it printed on souvenirs from Mobile to Huntsville. The name reflects Alabama's deep geographic and cultural position at the center of the American South, the region historically known as Dixie. It also speaks to a certain pride in Southern identity that has defined this state across generations, for better and for worse, through periods of honor and periods that required hard reckoning. Fact number 4. In terms of size, Alabama covers approximately 52,419 square miles of land and water. That ranks it as the 30th largest state in the country, right in the middle of the pack. But what makes Alabama's geography remarkable isn't its raw size, it's the sheer diversity packed into those 52,000 square miles. Within its borders, you'll find ancient Appalachian ridges and valleys in the northeast, the wide flat plains of the Black Belt in the center, the rich river bottomlands near the coast, and white sandy beaches along the Gulf of Mexico. For a state that's not particularly large, Alabama is extraordinarily varied. Fact number 5. Alabama shares its borders with 4 neighboring states. To the north lies Tennessee, to the east, Georgia, to the west, Mississippi, and to the south, in a narrow strip, Florida, before Alabama's coastline meets the Gulf of Mexico. This geographic position has always made Alabama a crossroads. Goods, people, cultures, and conflicts have flowed through this state in every direction, connecting the deep south to the upper south, the eastern seaboard to the western frontier, and the interior of the continent to the sea. Fact number 6. Alabama's coastline along the Gulf of Mexico stretches for approximately 60 miles. That might sound modest compared to states like Florida or Texas, but those 60 miles punch far above their weight. The Gulf Coast of Alabama is home to some of the most stunning beaches in the entire country. Powder white quartz sand beaches that slope gently into the warm, clear, emerald green waters of the Gulf. Towns like Gulf Shores and Orange Beach draw millions of visitors every year. And the marine ecosystem just offshore supports a thriving commercial and recreational fishing industry that has sustained coastal communities for generations. Fact number 7. Alabama's current population stands at approximately 5 million people, making it the 24th most populous state in the nation. The population is concentrated primarily in a handful of urban centers: Birmingham, Montgomery, Huntsville, and Mobile, while large stretches of the state remain rural, with small towns and agricultural communities spread across the fertile plains and forested hills. This urban-rural divide is a defining feature of Alabama's social and political landscape, shaping everything from local economics to state elections. Fact number 8. Birmingham is Alabama's largest city by population, home to roughly 1.1 million people in its greater metropolitan area. Despite not being the capital, Birmingham is in many ways the economic and cultural engine of the state. It rose to prominence in the late 19th century as one of the most industrially important cities in the American South, a place where iron ore, coal, and limestone came together to feed massive steel furnaces. Today, Birmingham has reinvented itself into a city of healthcare, finance, technology, and the arts, while also grappling honestly with its complex civil rights history. Fact number 9. Mobile holds the distinction of being the oldest continuously inhabited city in the entire state of Alabama. Founded by French colonists in 1702, more than 70 years before American independence, Mobile has a history that stretches back to a time when this land was part of New France, then British West Florida, then Spanish Florida, before eventually becoming part of the United States. That layered colonial history gives Mobile a unique cultural character that sets it apart from the rest of Alabama. A Creole flavor, a Mediterranean sensibility, and a tradition of celebration that includes the oldest Mardi Gras festivities in North America. More on that remarkable claim in a few moments. Fact number 10. The name Alabama itself has a fascinating origin. The state is named after the Alabama River, which in turn was named after the Alabama people, a Native American tribe of the Muskogean language family who inhabited the region for centuries before European contact. The Alabama people were part of the broader Creek Confederacy, a powerful alliance of southeastern tribes. The exact meaning of the word Alabama is debated by scholars, but it is commonly believed to derive from a phrase in the Alabama language meaning something along the lines of "those who clear the thicket" or "vegetation gatherers," a reference to the people's agricultural practices and their deep relationship with the land. Fact number 11. The Tennessee River is one of the most important natural features of northern Alabama. Stretching across the northern part of the state in a wide arc, it has been a source of sustenance, transportation, and power for thousands of years. In the 20th century, the Tennessee Valley Authority, one of the great infrastructure projects of the New Deal era, constructed a series of dams along the river that provided flood control, electricity, and economic development to the entire region. Today, the Tennessee River feeds enormous reservoirs like Wheeler Lake, Wilson Lake, and Guntersville Lake, which are central to northern Alabama's economy and recreational life. Fact number 12. Alabama has more than 77,000 miles of streams and rivers within its borders. 77,000 miles. To put that in perspective, the circumference of the Earth is just under 25,000 miles. Alabama's waterways, if laid end to end, would wrap around the planet more than 3 times. This extraordinary network of flowing water drains an enormous watershed, feeds some of the continent's most diverse ecosystems, and has historically been the lifeblood of agriculture, industry, and settlement throughout the state. Fact number 13. Alabama actually has more miles of navigable inland waterways than any state in the country except Alaska. This is a fact that surprises many people. When you think of states with great inland waterways, you might think of Louisiana or the Mississippi Basin states. But Alabama's rivers, the Tennessee, the Tombigbee, the Alabama, the Coosa, the Tallapoosa, form an interconnected system of navigable channels that have supported commercial barge traffic for centuries. The Tennessee-Tombigbee Waterway, a massive engineering project completed in the 1980s, connects the Tennessee River all the way to the Gulf of Mexico, opening an entirely new shipping corridor for the interior of the United States. Fact number 14. The Mobile Tensaw Delta, located just north of Mobile Bay, is the second largest river delta in the entire United States, second only to the Mississippi Delta. Covering roughly 250,000 acres of wetlands, backwater swamps, and braided river channels, the mobile Tensas Delta is sometimes called the Amazon of North America for its extraordinary biodiversity. It is home to dozens of rare plant and animal species, and scientists believe it contains a higher concentration of endemic species, plants and animals found nowhere else on Earth, than almost any other region in North America. It is, in a very real sense, one of the most biologically important places on the continent. Fact number 15. Alabama has 67 counties, each with its own distinct geography, history, and character. The counties range enormously in size and population, from Jefferson County in north-central Alabama, which contains Birmingham and is home to more than 650,000 people, to Greene County in the western Black Belt, which has fewer than 8,000 residents. This county-level diversity reflects the broader patchwork of Alabama's identity: an industrial north, a rural agricultural center, a mountainous east, a coastal south, and everything in between. Fact number 16. Here is a fact that will genuinely astonish most people who hear it for the first time. Alabama is home to more species of trees than all of Northern Europe combined. Northern Europe, the United Kingdom, Scandinavia, Germany, the Low Countries, and their neighbors, has a relatively limited tree flora due to the effects of the last ice age, which wiped out most tree species that couldn't migrate south fast enough. Alabama, by contrast, sits in a region that served as a refugium, a safe haven, for plant species during the Ice Age. As a result, its forests are ancient in a way that is hard to fully appreciate, carrying a botanical legacy that stretches back millions of years. Fact number 17. Alabama has more freshwater fish diversity than almost any other place in North America. Scientists have documented over 300 native freshwater fish species within the state's rivers and streams. That number represents a staggering share of all freshwater fish species in the entire United States. The reason for this abundance is closely tied to Alabama's geography. Its rivers drain into the Gulf of Mexico via isolated independent systems, which over millions of years allowed distinct fish species to evolve in each watershed, producing a kaleidoscope of biological diversity. Fact number 18. Building on that remarkable theme, Alabama is also home to more species of freshwater mussels than any other state in the country. Freshwater mussels might not be the most glamorous creatures, but they are extraordinarily important to aquatic ecosystems. They filter water, stabilize river bottoms, and provide food for other species. Alabama's rivers once held some of the most spectacular mussel communities on Earth. Unfortunately, dam construction, pollution, and habitat loss have dramatically reduced many mussel populations in recent decades, and a significant number of Alabama's mussel species are now listed as endangered or threatened. Conservation biologists from around the world come to Alabama to study and work to protect these irreplaceable animals. Fact number 19. Alabama has the greatest diversity of cave and spring ecosystems in the United States. The state's limestone geology, particularly in its northern regions, has produced thousands of caves and springs, many of which harbor remarkable communities of specialized animals: eyeless fish, colorless crayfish, blind cave beetles, and other creatures that have spent millions of years adapting to life in total darkness. Many of these cave-dwelling species are found in only a single cave system in the entire world. You lose the cave, lose the species, forever. Alabama's subterranean world is one of the great, underappreciated biodiversity treasures of North America. Fact number 20. Alabama has recorded more than 400 species of birds within its borders, making it an outstanding destination for birdwatchers and naturalists. Its position along the Gulf Coast migration corridor means that each spring and fall, enormous numbers of migratory birds pour through the state, on their way between their breeding grounds in the north and their wintering grounds in Central and South America. Fort Morgan State, historic site at the tip of Alabama's Gulf Coast Peninsula, is particularly celebrated among birders, as migrating songbirds sometimes land there by the thousands after crossing the Gulf of Mexico in a single exhausting overnight flight. In fact number 21, the state bird of Alabama is the northern flicker, a large and beautifully marked woodpecker also known as the yellowhammer. The yellowhammer has a special place in Alabama's history because Confederate soldiers from Alabama during the Civil War were nicknamed yellowhammers, a reference to the yellow-trimmed uniforms worn by some Alabama cavalry units, whose bright accents reminded observers of the bird's distinctive yellow underwings. The nickname stuck, and the yellowhammer eventually became the official state bird in 1927. Fact number 22. Alabama's state flower is the camellia, a flowering shrub with large, waxy, brilliantly colored blooms in shades of red, pink, and white. Originally native to Eastern Asia, yeet camellias were introduced to Alabama and the broader American South in the 18th and 19th centuries, and quickly became one of the defining plants of southern gardens. Alabama adopted the camellia as its state flower in 1959. They bloom in the cooler months of late fall and winter, providing a burst of color when most other plants have gone dormant, and they remain a beloved symbol of Alabama's horticultural heritage. Fact number 23. The state tree of Alabama is the longleaf pine, and its story is one of both grandeur and tragedy. Before European settlement, longleaf pine forests covered an estimated 90 million acres across the southeastern United States, including vast swaths of Alabama. These forests were among the most ecologically rich temperate ecosystems on the planet, supporting hundreds of plant and animal species. By the 20th century, logging, fire suppression, and land conversion had reduced the longleaf pine's range to less than 3% of its original extent. Today, longleaf pine restoration is one of the major conservation priorities in Alabama and the broader Southeast as scientists and land managers work to bring back what was nearly lost entirely. Fact number 24. Cheaha Mountain, located in the Talladega National Forest in Cleburne County, is the highest point in Alabama, standing at 2,413 feet above sea level. While that elevation might seem modest compared to the Rocky Mountains or even the Appalachians further north, Cheaha sits atop the southernmost extension of the Appalachian mountain chain, one of the oldest mountain systems on Earth, with rocks that formed over 300 million years ago. The summit offers sweeping views across the forested ridges and valleys of northeastern Alabama, and the surrounding state park is one of the most popular natural destinations in the state. Fact number 25. Little River Canyon, located near Fort Payne in DeKalb County, is one of the deepest canyons east of the Mississippi River. At its deepest point, the canyon walls drop roughly 600 feet from the plateau above to the river below. What makes Little River Canyon especially unusual is the origin of the river that carved it. Little River begins and flows almost its entire course on top of Lookout Mountain, making it one of the few rivers in the eastern United States that runs primarily on a mountaintop before plunging over the canyon rim. The canyon is now a national preserve and is considered one of Alabama's most spectacular natural wonders. Fact number 26. Cathedral Caverns, located in Marshall County in northeastern Alabama, is one of the most awe-inspiring underground spaces in the entire United States. The cave's entrance is one of the largest of any commercial cave in the country, measuring approximately 126 feet wide and 25 feet tall, wide enough to drive a large truck through with room to spare. Inside, the cavern opens into vast chambers filled with massive stalagmites, stalactites, flowstone formations, and the cathedral-like sense of space that gives the cave its name. Cathedral Caverns is now a state park and welcomes visitors year-round for guided tours of its remarkable underground world. Fact number 27. Alabama's state fossil is the Basilosaurus, and it is a creature that tells a truly extraordinary story about deep time and evolutionary history. Basilosaurus was an ancient whale that lived approximately 34 to 40 million years ago during the Eocene epoch. Unlike modern whales, Basilosaurus had a long, serpentine body that could reach 60 feet or more in length, along with small vestigial hind limbs, remnants of its land-dwelling ancestors, and a skull filled with large, sharp teeth. Fossils of Basilosaurus have been found throughout Alabama's Black Belt region, in rock layers that were once the floor of a shallow, warm sea. The creature was named Alabama's state fossil in 1984, a fitting tribute to the ancient ocean that once covered this now landlocked land. Fact number 28. Alabama's state gemstone is the star blue quartz, a rare and beautiful variety of quartz that displays asterism, meaning it shows a star-like pattern of light when viewed under direct illumination. Star blue quartz is found in the metamorphic rocks of the Appalachian Highlands in northeastern Alabama. While not the most commercially prominent gemstone in the world, it is a uniquely Alabama mineral and was designated as the official state gem in 1990 as a recognition of the state's geological heritage. Fact number 29. Alabama has a humid subtropical climate throughout most of its area, characterized by long, hot, humid summers and mild winters. Average summer temperatures across much of the state regularly exceed 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and the humidity makes it feel even hotter. And winters in the southern part of the state are quite mild. Mobile, for instance, rarely sees freezing temperatures, while the northern highlands can experience significant winter cold and occasional heavy snowfall. Alabama also sits in a region known as Dixie Alley, which experiences a high frequency of tornadoes, particularly in the spring months. The state has suffered some of the deadliest tornado outbreaks in American history, including the catastrophic super outbreak of April 2011, which sent dozens of violent tornadoes across the state and killed more than 230 Alabamians in a single day. Fact number 30. Alabama's state motto, displayed on its official seal and embedded in the consciousness of its citizens, is the Latin phrase Audemus jura nostra defendere, which translates to, "We dare defend our rights." The motto was adopted in 1923 and was taken from a poem written by Alabama poet Marie Bankhead Owen. It is a phrase that has carried very different meanings to different people across Alabama's history, invoked at times to defend noble causes and at other times to defend deeply unjust ones. What is undeniable is that Alabama has always been a place of passionate conviction, where people have been willing to fight, sometimes at tremendous personal cost, for what they believe in. That spirit, for all its complexity, is woven into the very fabric of this state. Fact number 31. Long before Alabama was a state, long before it was even a concept in the minds of European explorers, this land was home to some of the most sophisticated and complex civilizations in all of North America. The Mississippian culture, which flourished from roughly 800 to 1600 CE, built elaborate mound complexes across what is now Alabama. These flat-topped earthen pyramids served as foundations for temples, ceremonial centers, and the homes of elite leaders. Moundville, located along the Black Warrior River in Hale County, was one of the largest and most powerful Mississippian cities on the continent. At its peak, around 1000 CE, Moundville covered nearly 300 acres and was home to thousands of people. Today, it is an archaeological park and museum, and it remains one of the most important Native American heritage sites in the United States. Fact number 32. By the time European explorers arrived in the 16th century, Alabama was home to several major Native American tribes who had deep roots in the land. The most prominent of these were the Creek, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Alabama people themselves. Each of these tribes had its own language, its own political structure, its own spiritual traditions, and its own carefully maintained relationship with the rivers, forests, and farmland of the region. The Creek Confederacy, in particular, was a powerful political alliance of dozens of towns spread across what is now Alabama and Georgia, and it would play a major role in the conflicts and negotiations that accompanied European colonization. Fact number 33. The first European to lead an expedition through what is now Alabama was the Spanish explorer Hernando de Soto, who marched through the region in 1540 with a large force of soldiers, slaves, and livestock. De Soto's expedition was brutal. His forces clashed violently with Native American communities. And the Battle of Mobile, fought somewhere in present-day Alabama, was one of the bloodiest engagements between Europeans and Native Americans in the history of North America. Estimates suggest that hundreds or even thousands of Native Americans were killed in the battle, and De Soto's own forces suffered serious casualties. The exact location of Mobile has never been conclusively identified by archaeologists, and its search remains one of the great mysteries of American historical research. Fact number 34. French colonists established the first permanent European settlement in what is now Alabama when they founded Mobile in 1702. The settlement was originally located at a site called 27 Mile Bluff on the Mobile River, before being moved to its current location near Mobile Bay in 1711. Mobile served as the capital of French Louisiana for nearly 2 decades, making it one of the most important administrative centers in all of French North America. The city changed hands several times over the following centuries. From France to Britain in 1763, from Britain to Spain in 1780, and finally from Spain to the United States in 1813. Each transition leaving its mark on the city's culture, architecture, and identity. Fact number 35. One of the darkest chapters in Alabama's early history, and in the broader history of the United States, is the forced removal of Native American tribes from their ancestral lands during the 1820s and 1830s. Under President Andrew Jackson's Indian Removal Act of 1830, the federal government systematically expelled the Creek, Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Oz, and Seminole peoples from the southeastern states and forced them to relocate to designated Indian territory west of the Mississippi River, in what is now Oklahoma. The routes of these forced marches became known collectively as the Trail of Tears. Thousands of Native Americans died from exposure, disease, and starvation along the way. It was one of the most catastrophic acts of ethnic displacement in American history, and its legacy continues to shape the lives of Native American communities to this day. Fact number 36. After the removal of Native American tribes, Alabama experienced a rapid influx of white settlers and enslaved African Americans in the 1830s and 1840s. The rich, dark soils of central Alabama's Black Belt region, named for the color of its fertile soil, not its demographics, though it would eventually become associated with both, proved extraordinarily productive for growing cotton. Alabama became one of the most prosperous cotton-producing states in the antebellum South, and that prosperity rested entirely on the labor of enslaved people. By 1860, nearly half of Alabama's total population of roughly 964,000 people were enslaved. This economic system built on human bondage would define Alabama's social structure and political identity for generations, and its consequences have never fully been resolved. Fact number 37. Alabama seceded from the United States of America on January 11, 1861, just weeks after South Carolina had become the first state to leave the Union. Alabama's secession was driven by the defense of slavery and resistance to the election of Abraham Lincoln, who had campaigned on a platform of preventing the expansion of slavery into new territories. The secession convention in Montgomery was a contentious affair. Not every delegate was enthusiastic about leaving the Union, but in the end, the vote for secession passed, and Alabama cast its lot with the Confederacy. Fact number 38. Montgomery, Alabama served as the first capital of the Confederate States of America. It was in Montgomery on February 18, 1861, that Jefferson Davis was inaugurated as the first and only president of the Confederacy on the steps of the Alabama state capitol, a building that still stands today. The Confederate government remained in Montgomery for only a few months before relocating to Richmond, Virginia, but the city's role as the birthplace of the Confederacy left a permanent stamp on its identity. The first White House of the Confederacy, where Jefferson Davis and his family lived during those early months, is still preserved as a museum in downtown Montgomery. Fact number 39. Alabama contributed enormously to the Confederate war effort, sending an estimated 90,000 to 100,000 soldiers into Confederate service over the course of the war. The state also supplied iron, coal, and industrial output from the Birmingham region that was critical to Confederate manufacturing. However, Alabama was not spared from the destruction of the war. Union forces under General James Wilson conducted a devastating cavalry raid through the state in the spring of 1865, destroying industrial facilities, railroads, and supplies in cities including Selma and Tuscaloosa. By the time the Confederacy collapsed in April 1865, Alabama had suffered enormous losses in both lives and infrastructure. Fact number 40. Fort Morgan and Fort Gaines, the two masonry fortifications guarding the entrance to Mobile Bay at Alabama's Gulf Coast, were the sites of one of the most famous naval battles of the Civil War. On August 5, 1864, Union Admiral David Farragut led a fleet of warships into Mobile Bay in an attempt to close the port to Confederate blockade runners. Confederate forces had mined the bay entrance with underwater torpedoes, what we would today call naval mines. And when one of Farragut's lead ships struck a torpedo and sank, the fleet hesitated. It was at this moment that Farragut allegedly gave his most famous order, shouting something to the effect of, "Damn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." The Union fleet charged through. It defeated the Confederate naval forces and captured Mobile Bay, though the city of Mobile itself held out until the very end of the war. Fact number 41. After the Confederacy's defeat and the end of the Civil War in 1865, Alabama entered the turbulent period known as Reconstruction. The state was placed under military rule and required to ratify the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, granting citizenship to formerly enslaved people before it could be readmitted to the Union. Alabama was formally readmitted in 1868, making it, as noted earlier, the last of the former Confederate states to be welcomed back. The Reconstruction era brought significant political changes to Alabama, including the election of African American men to state and federal office for the first time. However, those gains were systematically dismantled in the decades that followed through violence, voter suppression, and the institutionalization of racial segregation. Fact number 42. The period following Reconstruction, known as the Redemption Era, saw white supremacist Democrats retake control of Alabama's government and impose a rigid system of racial segregation and disenfranchisement. Alabama's 1901 state constitution. The same extraordinarily long document we mentioned earlier, the one with over 900 amendments, was specifically designed to strip Black Alabamians of the right to vote through poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and other mechanisms that were facially race-neutral but were applied in nakedly discriminatory ways. By the early 20th century, Black voter registration in Alabama had been reduced to almost nothing, and that system of oppression would remain largely intact for more than half a century. Fact number 43. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Birmingham emerged as one of the most industrially significant cities in the entire American South. The discovery that iron ore, coal, and limestone, the three raw materials needed to produce steel, were all present within a short distance of each other in the Birmingham area, made the city an industrial powerhouse almost overnight. Steel mills, blast furnaces, and iron foundries sprang up across the region, and Birmingham's population grew explosively. By the early 20th century, it had earned the nickname the Pittsburgh of the South, a comparison that captured both its industrial might and the grim, smoky, worker-heavy character of its early decades. Fact number 44. The great Vulcan statue that watches over Birmingham from atop Red Mountain is one of the most remarkable civic monuments in the United States, and it carries the story of Birmingham's industrial identity in its very material. Vulcan, the Roman god of fire, metalworking, and the forge, was cast entirely from Birmingham iron and steel for the 1904 World's Fair in St. Louis. Standing 56 feet tall and weighing more than 100,000 pounds, Vulcan is the largest cast iron statue in the world. After the World's Fair, he was brought back to Birmingham, where he has stood ever since, gazing out over the city that made him. Today, Vulcan Park is one of Alabama's most visited attractions, and the statue is considered one of the great symbols of the industrial South. Fact number 45. Tuskegee University, founded in 1881 in the small town of Tuskegee, Alabama, is one of the most historically significant institutions of higher education in the United States. It was established by Booker T. Washington, a formerly enslaved man who had educated himself and become one of the most influential African American leaders of his era. Washington built Tuskegee from virtually nothing. The school's first students literally made the bricks to construct their own classrooms. Over the decades, Tuskegee became a center of African American intellectual life, scientific research, and professional training, and it has produced generations of doctors, engineers, educators, and leaders. Fact number 46. Among the many remarkable figures associated with Tuskegee University, perhaps none is more celebrated than George Washington Carver, who joined the faculty in 1896 and spent the next 47 years of his life conducting research there. Carver is best known for his work with peanuts. He developed hundreds of practical applications for the peanut, from foods and beverages to dyes, plastics, and cosmetics. But his contributions went far beyond that. He developed new agricultural techniques that helped Southern farmers recover soil depleted by decades of cotton monoculture, advocated for crop diversification, and worked tirelessly to improve the economic conditions of black farmers throughout the South. He was, by any measure, one of the greatest agricultural scientists in American history. Fact number 47. The University of Alabama, located in Tuscaloosa, is the flagship public university of the state and one of the oldest universities in the South. It was chartered in 1820 and opened its doors in 1831, just 12 years after Alabama became a state. The university has had a complex and often painful history. It was the site of the infamous stand in the schoolhouse door in June 1963, when Governor George Wallace physically blocked the entrance to Foster Auditorium in a symbolic attempt to prevent the enrollment of two black students, Vivian Malone Jones and James Hood. President Kennedy federalized the Alabama National Guard. Wallace stepped aside and the university was desegregated, a moment that crystallized the confrontation between federal authority and state-sanctioned segregation. Fact number 48. Auburn University, located in the city of Auburn in eastern Alabama, was founded in 1856 as the East Alabama Male College and became a land-grant institution after the Civil War. Today, it is one of the largest universities in the Southeast and is renowned for its programs in engineering, agriculture, veterinary medicine, and business. Auburn and the University of Alabama share one of the most passionate and deeply felt rivalries in all of college sports. The Iron Bowl, played annually between their football teams, is a cultural event of enormous significance in Alabama that brings the entire state to a near standstill every November. Fact number 49. During World War II, one of the most important and inspiring chapters in Alabama's history unfolded at a small airfield in Tuskegee. The Tuskegee Airmen, the first African-American military aviators in United States history, trained at Moton Field in Tuskegee under a U.S. Army Air Corps program established in 1941. These men faced not only the challenges of mastering combat aviation, but also the relentless indignity of fighting for a country that did not grant them equal rights. Despite that, they flew with extraordinary distinction in North Africa and Europe, completing thousands of combat missions and earning hundreds of decorations. Their service helped pave the way for the desegregation of the U.S. military in 1948 and remains one of the proudest chapters in both Alabama's and America's history. Fact number 50. The USS Alabama, BB-60, a South Dakota-class battleship commissioned in 1942, served with great distinction during World War II. It participating in operations in both the Atlantic and Pacific theaters. The ship earned 9 battle stars for her service and was never hit by enemy fire during the entire war. After the war, a campaign by Alabama citizens raised over $1 million to bring the battleship home as a memorial. The USS Alabama has been permanently moored in Mobile Bay since 1964 and is now the centerpiece of Battleship Memorial Park, one of the most visited attractions in the state. Visitors can tour the ship's gun turrets, crew quarters, and combat operations center, getting an intimate look at life aboard a World War II warship. Fact number 51. World War II had a transformative effect on Alabama's economy. The state's existing industrial infrastructure in Birmingham was expanded and repurposed for wartime production. And the federal government poured enormous resources into Alabama through military bases, shipyards, and defense contracts. Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, which would later become famous for its role in the space program, was established during World War II as a chemical weapons storage facility. The shipyards in Mobile built hundreds of vessels for the U.S. Navy and Merchant Marine. By the end of the war, Alabama had been fundamentally changed by the infusion of federal investment, and the stage was set for the extraordinary scientific developments that would follow in Huntsville over the next 2 decades. Fact number 52. Alabama's Maxwell Air Force Base, located in Montgomery, has been a center of American air power since the early days of aviation. The base was originally established as an aviation field in 1910, just 7 years after the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, and has grown into one of the most important Air Force installations in the world. Today, it is home to Air University, the Air Force's professional military education system, which trains officers and senior leaders from the United States and allied nations. Maxwell's long history connects the very dawn of the age of flight to the most sophisticated air and space power of the present day. Fact number 53. Huntsville, Alabama's fourth largest city, carries one of the most extraordinary nicknames in the United States, Rocket City. It earned that name through its absolutely central role in the development of American space exploration. In the years following World War II, a team of German rocket scientists led by Wernher von Braun was brought to the United States under a classified program called Operation Paperclip. These scientists, who had developed the V-2 ballistic missile for Nazi Germany, were relocated to Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, where they began work on rockets for the U.S. Army. What followed was one of the most consequential scientific programs in human history. Fact number 54. Wernher von Braun and his team at Redstone Arsenal developed the Redstone rocket, the first large American ballistic missile, in the early 1950s. The Redstone would go on to launch the first two Americans into space, Alan Shepard on May 5, 1961, and Gus Grissom on July 21, 1961, on suborbital flights that marked the beginning of American human spaceflight. Those launches made Huntsville the literal birthplace of American manned space exploration, a distinction that the city wears with enormous and entirely justified pride. Fact number 55. In 1960, NASA established the Marshall Space Flight Center on the grounds of Redstone Arsenal in Huntsville, with Wernher von Braun as its first director. Marshall became the lead center for the development of launch vehicles, the rockets that would carry American astronauts into orbit and beyond. Over the following decade, Marshall's engineers and scientists tackled some of the most complex engineering challenges in the history of technology, designing and building rockets capable of sending human beings 250,000 miles through space to land on the surface of the moon. Fact number 56. The Saturn V rocket, the vehicle that carried Apollo astronauts to the moon, was developed and tested primarily at NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville. The Saturn V remains to this day the most powerful launch vehicle ever successfully flown. It stood 363 feet tall, taller than the Statue of Liberty with its pedestal, and generated 7.6 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. 13 Saturn. 5 rockets were launched between 1967 and 1973, and all 13 missions were successful. 6 of them landed humans on the moon. Not a single crew member was ever lost on a Saturn V mission. It is arguably the greatest engineering achievement in human history, and a significant part of that achievement belongs to the scientists and engineers working in Huntsville, Alabama. Fact number 57. The U.S. Space and Rocket Center, located in Huntsville adjacent to the Marshall Space Flight Center, is one of the world's largest space science museums, and was the first museum dedicated exclusively to space exploration. It houses an extraordinary collection of rockets, spacecraft, spacesuits, and artifacts spanning the entire history of the American space program, including a fully restored Saturn V rocket, displayed horizontally in a dedicated pavilion. The museum also operates Space Camp, the legendary educational program that has introduced generations of young people to the wonders of space exploration and inspired countless future scientists, engineers, and astronauts since its founding in 1982. Fact number 58. Alabama's contribution to the space program did not end with the Apollo era. Here, the Marshall Space Flight Center continued to play a leading role in American space exploration through the Space Shuttle program, for which Marshall developed the main engines and the enormous external fuel tank. More recently, Marshall has been deeply involved in the development of the Space Launch System, NASA's next-generation heavy-lift rocket designed to carry astronauts to the Moon and eventually to Mars. The tradition of rocket science that began with Wernher von Braun's team in the 1950s continues in Huntsville to this day, with thousands of engineers and scientists working on the vehicles that will carry humanity further into the cosmos. Fact number 59. The economic impact of the aerospace and defense industry on Huntsville and the broader northern Alabama region is enormous. The Huntsville metropolitan area is home to the largest research park in the United States, Cummings Research Park, which houses over 300 companies and employs tens of thousands of workers in technology, defense, and aerospace. Huntsville has consistently ranked among the most educated cities in the United States in terms of the percentage of its workforce holding advanced degrees. a direct result of the concentration of scientific and engineering talent drawn to the region by NASA and the defense industry. Fact number 60. Alabama's broader contributions to science and technology extend well beyond the space program. The state is home to a robust network of research universities, including the University of Alabama, Auburn University, the University of Alabama at Birmingham, and Alabama A&M University, which together conduct hundreds of millions of dollars in research annually across fields ranging from medicine and genetics to materials science and agricultural technology. The University of Alabama at Birmingham in particular has become one of the leading medical research and treatment centers in the southeastern United States, with a medical school, a nationally ranked hospital system, and research programs in cancer, infectious disease, and neuroscience that have produced discoveries with global impact. Fact number 61. To understand Alabama in the 20th century, you have to understand the system of racial oppression it lived under for the first half of that century. Jim Crow laws, a web of state and local statutes enforcing racial segregation in virtually every area of public life, governed Alabama from the 1870s through the 1960s. Black Alabamians were forced to use separate and almost always inferior schools, hospitals, restaurants, restrooms, water fountains, and transportation. They were systematically denied the right to vote through poll taxes, literacy tests, and outright violence. This was not accidental or informal. It was a deliberate legal architecture designed to keep African Americans economically disadvantaged, politically powerless, and socially humiliated. It was, by any honest definition, a system of apartheid, and Alabama was one of its most committed defenders. Fact number 62. The man who would become the defining voice of resistance to that system. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. arrived in Montgomery, Alabama in 1954 as the new pastor of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. King was 25 years old, freshly graduated from Boston University with his doctorate in systematic theology, and he had chosen Montgomery deliberately, believing the South was where the struggle for civil rights would be decided. The church sits just a few hundred yards from the Alabama state capitol, a proximity that would soon become deeply symbolic as the movement King led challenged the very government whose building cast a shadow over his congregation. Fact number 63. On December 1st, 1955, Rosa Parks, a 42-year-old seamstress and trained civil rights activist who served as secretary of the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, refused to give up her seat on a Montgomery city bus to a white passenger when ordered to do so by the driver. Parks was arrested and charged with violating Montgomery's bus segregation ordinance. Her arrest and the organized community response that followed would set in motion a chain of events that permanently altered the course of American history. It is worth noting that Parks was not the first black woman to refuse to give up her seat on a Montgomery bus. Others had done so earlier that year, but the NAACP chose her case strategically because of her impeccable character and her standing in the community. Fact number 64. The Montgomery bus boycott that followed Rosa Parks' arrest lasted 381 days, from December 5th, 1955 to December 20th, 1956. For over a year, the black community of Montgomery, which made up the majority of the city's bus riders, refused to ride the buses. They walked miles to work, organized carpools, and endured harassment, violence, and economic retaliation to sustain the boycott. Dr. King emerged as the movement's leader during this period, and his home was bombed while his wife and infant daughter were inside. The boycott ended only after the United States Supreme Court ruled in November 1956 that bus segregation was unconstitutional. It was a total, complete, hard-won victory, achieved not through legislation or litigation alone, but through the sustained, disciplined collective action of ordinary people. Fact number 65. Yes, Birmingham, Alabama in the early 1960s was one of the most racially segregated and violently policed cities in the country. The city's public safety commissioner, Theophilus Eugene Bull Connor, was an unapologetic white supremacist who used the full force of law enforcement to maintain segregation. In the spring of 1963, Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference launched Project C for Confrontation, a campaign of nonviolent direct action in Birmingham designed to provoke a response from Connor that would expose the brutality of segregation to the watching nation and world. The campaign included sit-ins, marches, and eventually the deployment of hundreds of school children, some as young as 6 years old, in what became known as the Children's Crusade. Fact number 66. Bull Connor responded to the Birmingham protests exactly as King had anticipated and hoped he would, with fire hoses and police dogs turned against peaceful demonstrators, including children. The images that appeared in newspapers and on television screens around the world of young people being slammed against walls by high-pressure water jets, of police dogs lunging at marchers, horrified the American public and the international community. President John F. Kennedy, who had been cautious about the pace of civil rights reform, was moved to action. In June 1963, he delivered a nationally televised address calling civil rights a moral issue and proposing what would become the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Fact number 67. On September 15, 1963, just weeks after the March on Washington and Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech, a bomb planted by members of the Ku Klux Klan detonated beneath the steps of the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham. 4 young girls were killed in the blast. Addie Mae Collins, who was 14, Cynthia Wesley, who was 14, Carol Robertson, who was 14, and Carol Denise McNair, who was just 11 years old. The 4 girls were in the church basement preparing for Sunday services. The bombing sent shockwaves through the nation and the world. More than any other single act, it crystallized the moral stakes of the civil rights struggle. The men responsible were not convicted for decades. The last conviction did not come until 2002. Fact number 68. The city of Selma, Alabama became the focal point of the voting rights movement in early 1965. Despite the Civil Rights Act of 1964 having banned segregation in public accommodations, the systematic denial of black voting rights remained largely intact across the South. In January 1965, Dr. King and the SCLC chose Selma as the staging ground for a campaign to demand federal voting rights legislation. On March 7, 1965, a day that would become known as Bloody Sunday, approximately 600 peaceful marchers set out from Selma toward Montgomery to protest the killing of a young black activist named Jimmy Lee Jackson. When the marchers reached the Edmund Pettus Bridge, they were met by state troopers and sheriff's deputies who attacked them with clubs, tear gas, and horses. The violence was captured on film and broadcast on national television, shocking the country into action. Fact number 69. 2 weeks after Bloody Sunday, a third and finally successful march from Selma to Montgomery took place, protected by federalized National Guard troops. On March 25, 1965, tens of thousands of people, black and white, from Alabama and from across the country, completed the 54-mile journey and gathered at the Alabama State Capitol in Montgomery, where Dr. King delivered one of his greatest speeches, asking how long the arc of the moral universe would take to bend toward justice, and answering, not long. 5 months later, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act of 1965 into law, one of the most consequential pieces of legislation in American history, which finally protected the right of black Americans to vote with the full force of federal law. Fact number 70. Alabama has made significant strides in confronting and memorializing its civil rights history in recent decades. The National Memorial for Peace and Justice, opened in Montgomery in 2018 and often called the Lynching Memorial, is a profoundly moving monument to the more than 4,000 African Americans who were lynched in the United States between Reconstruction and World War II, many of them in Alabama. It was created by Brian Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative, a Montgomery-based legal organization that has also opened the Legacy Museum in downtown Montgomery. Together, these institutions represent some of the most honest and unflinching public reckoning with racial injustice anywhere in the United States. And they have made Montgomery an important destination for anyone seeking to understand the full breadth of American history. And fact number 71. Alabama has produced a remarkable number of writers whose work has shaped American literature in profound ways. At the very top of that list stands Harper Lee, born in Monroeville, Alabama in 1926. Her novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, published in 1960, won the Pulitzer Prize and went on to become one of the best-selling and most widely read novels in American history. Set in a fictional Alabama town during the Great Depression, the book tells the story of a white lawyer named Atticus Finch, who defends a black man wrongly accused of a crime in a deeply segregated Southern community. The novel was a direct product of Lee's Alabama upbringing and Monroeville's courthouse, where her father, a lawyer, once practiced, served as a model for the story's central setting. Fact number 72. Truman Capote. Each one of the most celebrated American writers of the 20th century spent his childhood summers in Monroeville with his aunts, living just next door to Harper Lee. The two children became close friends and lifelong creative influences on each other. Capote is believed to be the partial inspiration for the character of Dill in To Kill a Mockingbird, while Lee is thought to have assisted Capote with the research for his landmark true crime masterpiece In Cold Blood, published in 1966. The intertwined literary histories of these two writers, both rooted in the same small Alabama town, is one of the most extraordinary coincidences in American literary history. Fact number 73. Helen Keller, born in Tuscumbia, Alabama on June 27, 1880, is one of the most extraordinary human beings in the recorded history of the United States. At 19 months old, she suffered an illness, probably scarlet fever or meningitis, that left her completely blind and deaf. In an era when most people in her condition were considered uneducable and were institutionalized, Keller, with the help of her remarkable teacher Anne Sullivan, learned to communicate through touch, then learned to read Braille, then learned to speak, then graduated from Radcliffe College with honors. She went on to become a celebrated author, lecturer, political activist, and co-founder of the ACLU. Her childhood home, Ivy Green, still stands in Tuscumbia and is open to visitors, and it hosts an annual outdoor drama telling her story. Fact number 74. Alabama's contribution to American music is nothing short of extraordinary. Hank Williams Sr., born in 1923 in the small community of Georgiana in Butler County, is almost universally regarded as the father of modern country music. In a career cut tragically short by his death on New Year's Day, 1953, at the age of 29, Williams recorded a body of work that permanently shaped the sound, the subject matter, and the emotional vocabulary of country music. Songs like Your Cheatin' Heart, I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry, Hey Good Lookin', and Jambalaya became standards that have been covered by hundreds of artists over the decades. Williams's music was rooted in the poverty, heartache, and spiritual longing of the Alabama rural poor, and those roots gave it an authenticity that has never faded. Fact number 75. Nat King Cole, born Nathaniel Adams Coles in Montgomery, Alabama on March the 17th. In 1919, was one of the most gifted and beloved entertainers of the 20th century. His family moved to Chicago when he was 4 years old, but his Alabama origins were the starting point of a life that would produce some of the most beautiful recordings in the history of American popular music. Cole was a supremely gifted jazz pianist before he became famous as a vocalist, and his warm, intimate baritone voice on songs like Unforgettable, Mona Lisa, and the Christmas song made him one of the most successful recording artists of the 1940s and 1950s. He was also a groundbreaking figure in terms of race. His NBC television variety show in 1956 was the first network television program hosted by an African American. Fact number 76. The blues, America's most fundamental and influential musical form, runs deep through Alabama's musical DNA. The state has produced numerous legendary blues musicians, and the influence of the Alabama blues can be heard in everything from rock and roll to soul, from jazz to hip-hop. The Muscle Shoals sound, developed in the small town of Muscle Shoals in northwestern Alabama during the 1960s and 1970s, became one of the most distinctive and sought-after sounds in American popular music. The Muscle Shoals Rhythm Section, a group of white musicians from rural Alabama nicknamed the Swampers, played on recording sessions for artists, including Aretha Franklin, Wilson Pickett, the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, and Paul Simon, producing hit after iconic hit in a modest recording studio on the banks of the Tennessee River. So fact number 77. Jesse Owens, born James Cleveland Owens on September 12, 1913 in Oakville, Alabama, achieved something at the 1936 Berlin Olympics that transcended sport and became a statement heard around the world. In front of Adolf Hitler and the architects of Nazi racial ideology, Owens won 4 gold medals in the 100 meters, the 200 meters, the long jump, and the 4x100-meter relay. His performances demolished the pseudo-scientific claims of Aryan racial superiority that the Nazis had built their ideology upon. Hitler reportedly refused to shake Owens' hand after his victories, a slight that became world famous. Owens returned to the United States a hero, though the racism he faced at home reminded him that American democracy still had far to go in living up to its own ideals. Fact number 78. Bo Jackson. Born Vincent Edward Jackson on November 30th, 1962 in Bessemer, Alabama, is widely considered the greatest natural athlete in the history of American professional sports. He is the only person ever to be named an All-Star in both Major League Baseball and the National Football League, a distinction that may never be matched. As a running back for the Los Angeles Raiders and as an outfielder for the Kansas City Royals, Jackson displayed a combination of speed, strength, and skill that left coaches, teammates, and opponents genuinely stunned. His career was cut short by a serious hip injury suffered during an NFL playoff game in 1991, leading many to wonder what might have been had he remained healthy. He remains, quite simply, a once-in-a-generation physical specimen. Fact number 79. Charles Barkley, born February the 20th, 1963 in Leeds, Alabama, is one of the greatest power forwards in the history of the National Basketball Association and one of the most compelling personalities the sport has ever produced. Standing just 6 feet 4 inches tall in a position dominated by players several inches taller, Barkley used his extraordinary strength, relentless aggression on the boards, and remarkable athleticism to become an 11-time All-Star, the 1993 NBA Most Valuable Player, and a 2-time Olympic gold medalist. After his playing career ended, he became an equally prominent television personality on TNT's Inside the NBA, where his blunt, unfiltered commentary has made him one of the most beloved figures in sports broadcasting. Fact number 80. Alabama's cultural heritage includes a deeply rooted tradition of Mardi Gras celebration that predates even the famous festivities in New Orleans. As mentioned briefly earlier, Mobile holds the distinction of hosting the oldest Mardi Gras celebration in what is now the United States. Dating back to 1703, when French colonists celebrated the holiday just a year after founding the settlement. New Orleans was not founded until 1718, and its Mardi Gras tradition developed later. Mobile's Mardi Gras is a beloved annual event that transforms the city with parades, masked balls, and elaborate pageantry for several weeks leading up to Fat Tuesday. The city is fiercely proud of this distinction, and the rivalry with New Orleans over which city has the older claim is a friendly but serious source of civic pride. Fact number 81. If you want to understand what Alabama cares about most passionately in the realm of popular culture, you need look no further than college football. The sport is not merely entertainment in Alabama. It is a cultural institution, a civic religion, a topic of conversation that never fully goes away regardless of the season. The University of Alabama, Crimson Tide, and the Auburn Tigers are both among the most successful and storied programs in the history of college football, and the state's loyalties are divided absolutely between them. In Alabama, everyone picks a side, and that loyalty is often passed down through families like an inheritance, sometimes superseding the question of which school, if any, a person actually attended. Fact number 82. The University of Alabama football program, based in Tuscaloosa, always has won more national championships than almost any other program in college football history. Under the legendary coach Paul "Bear" Bryant, who led the team from 1958 to 1982, Alabama won 6 national championships and became synonymous with excellence, discipline, and a particular brand of smash-mouth Southeastern football. The Bear Bryant era defined a generation of Alabama identity. Then, decades later, Nick Saban arrived in Tuscaloosa in 2007 and proceeded to build a dynasty that many consider even more dominant than Bryant's, winning 7 national championships before his retirement after the 2023 season. The two coaches together represent perhaps the greatest sustained period of excellence any program in any American team sport has ever achieved. Fact number 83. The Iron Bowl, the annual football game between the University of Alabama and Auburn University, is one of the most intensely anticipated and emotionally charged sporting events in the United States. The game has been played every year since 1948 and draws enormous television audiences nationwide. In Alabama, the Iron Bowl does not merely divide cities, it divides families, workplaces, and friendships. The stakes feel genuinely enormous to the people involved, and the game has produced some of the most dramatic moments in college football history. Perhaps none more so than the 2013 game, in which Auburn's Chris Davis returned a missed field goal 109 yards for a touchdown as time expired, a play known simply as the Kick Six, one of the most extraordinary finishes in the history of American sport. Fact number 84. Talladega Superspeedway, located in Talladega County in northeastern Alabama, is the largest and arguably the most exciting track in NASCAR. At 2.66 miles in length, it is the longest oval track in NASCAR, and its unique aerodynamic properties create the phenomenon known as superspeedway drafting, where cars race in tightly packed, high-speed groups, inches apart at speeds exceeding 200 miles per hour. The racing at Talladega is unpredictable, dramatic, and frequently chaotic, with massive multi-car crashes, known as the Big One, a near-constant possibility. The track holds over 80,000 permanent seats and has hosted some of the most memorable races in NASCAR history since it opened in 1969. Fact number 85. Alabama's Gulf Coast is home to some of the most beautiful beaches in the entire United States. And the tourism industry built around them is a major component of the state's coastal economy. The beaches of Gulf Shores and Orange Beach feature the famous white quartz sand that gives them their distinctive appearance. The sand is so fine and white because it is composed almost entirely of quartz crystals that were carried down from the Appalachian Mountains by rivers over millions of years, ground into powder, and deposited along the coast. The water in this part of the Gulf of Mexico has an extraordinary clarity and color, ranging from pale green to deep turquoise, that makes it genuinely competitive with Caribbean beaches in terms of pure visual beauty. Fact number 86. The Robert Trent Jones Golf Trail is one of Alabama's most unexpected and celebrated attractions. It's conceived in the late 1980s as a strategy to attract tourism and retirees to the state. The trail consists of 26 golf courses spread across 11 sites throughout Alabama, all designed by legendary golf course architect Robert Trent Jones Sr. The courses range from the mountains of the north to the Gulf Coast in the south and are consistently ranked among the finest public golf experiences anywhere in the world. The entire trail was developed at a fraction of the typical cost per hole because the state's pension fund provided initial financing, making it one of the most unusual public-private partnerships in American sports tourism history. Fact number 87. Alabama has a rich and deeply personal tradition of food culture that is inseparable from its broader Southern identity. Barbecue is a near-sacred institution in the state. And Alabama has its own distinctive regional style. White barbecue sauce, a tangy mayonnaise-based condiment invented at Big Bob Gibson's restaurant in Decatur in the 1920s and typically served on smoked chicken. It is a sauce unlike anything else in American barbecue, and it has developed a devoted following far beyond Alabama's borders in recent decades. Beyond barbecue, Alabama food culture encompasses fried catfish, shrimp and grits, cornbread, field peas, boiled peanuts sold from roadside stands, and the Gulf Coast's extraordinary fresh seafood, blue crabs, oysters, shrimp, and red snapper pulled straight from the warm waters just offshore. Fact number 88. The Barber Motorsports Park, located near Leeds, Alabama, just east of Birmingham, is a facility that defies easy categorization. It is simultaneously a world-class motorsports racing circuit, regularly hosting motorcycle and sports car races at the international level, and home to the Barber Vintage Motorsports Museum, which houses what is recognized as the world's largest collection of vintage and racing motorcycles. The museum contains over 1,400 motorcycles spanning more than a century of two-wheeled history, from antique machines built in the earliest years of the 20th century to modern championship racing bikes. The facility sits on 740 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds and is widely considered one of the most beautiful motorsports venues anywhere in the world. Fact number 89. Alabama is one of the most significant agricultural states in the southeastern United States. producing an enormous variety of crops and livestock. Broiler chickens, the birds raised for meat, are Alabama's single most valuable agricultural commodity, and the state consistently ranks among the top chicken-producing states in the country. Peanuts are another major crop, particularly in the southeastern part of the state. Corn, soybeans, cotton, sweet potatoes, and greenhouse and nursery products are also important, and Alabama's timber industry, harvesting pine and hardwood from its vast forests, contributes billions of dollars to the state economy annually. Agriculture in Alabama is both a major economic sector and a way of life that has defined rural communities for generations. Fact number 90. Alabama's automotive manufacturing industry has transformed the state's economy over the past 3 decades in ways that would have been nearly unimaginable in the mid-20th century. The transformation began when Mercedes-Benz chose Vance, Alabama, a small town near Tuscaloosa, as the site for its first American manufacturing plant in 1993. The decision was driven by Alabama's competitive labor costs, its geographic location, and significant incentive packages offered by the state government. In the years that followed, Honda opened a major plant in Lincoln, Hyundai built a facility in Montgomery, and Toyota established operations in Huntsville. Today, Alabama is one of the top automotive manufacturing states in the country, producing hundreds of thousands of vehicles annually and supporting tens of thousands of jobs directly and indirectly through an extensive network of parts suppliers and related businesses. Fact number 91. Alabama is home to one of the most unusual and storied traditions in American political history, the world's longest currently operational constitution. Alabama's state constitution, originally ratified in 1901, has been amended more than 977 times as of recent count, making it by a massive margin the longest active governing document of any government on Earth. For context, the United States Constitution has been amended just 27 times in over 230 years. Alabama's constitution, by contrast, has been amended so frequently and padded with so much hyper-local statutory content, including provisions governing specific counties, specific municipalities, and specific tax levies for individual communities, that it runs to hundreds of thousands of words. Efforts to rewrite and simplify it have been debated for decades, and a significant revision was finally passed by voters in 2022, though the process of implementing that revision continues. The old Constitution remains a fascinating and slightly absurd monument to the patchwork nature of Alabama governance. Fact number 92. Alabama has a surprisingly deep and distinguished tradition of political leadership at the national level. The state has sent representatives and senators to Washington who have shaped American policy across a wide range of eras and issues. Hugo Black, appointed to the Supreme Court by Franklin Roosevelt in 1937, served for 34 years and became one of the most influential justices in the history of the court, a fierce defender of First Amendment freedoms and civil liberties. John Sparkman served as the Democratic vice presidential nominee in 1952 alongside Adlai Stevenson. Howell Heflin and Richard Shelby both served long tenures in the Senate and wielded significant influence on national legislation. And in recent years, Alabama has been at the center of some of the most closely watched Senate races in the country, reflecting the state's evolving and sometimes surprising political character. Fact number 93. The tradition of African American political leadership in Alabama, suppressed for nearly a century by systematic disenfranchisement, has reasserted itself with enormous force and consequence in the decades since the Voting Rights Act. John Lewis, though a Georgia congressman, was born in Pike County, Alabama, and was among the most courageous foot soldiers of the Selma marches, suffering a fractured skull at the hands of state troopers on Bloody Sunday. He went on to serve in Congress for more than 3 decades as one of the most revered figures in American public life, known simply as the conscience of the Congress. Alabama-born figures like Condoleezza Rice, the first black woman to serve as U.S. Secretary of State, and countless judges, mayors, legislators, and community leaders have built on the sacrifices of the civil rights generation to reshape what political leadership in Alabama and America looks like. Fact number 94. Alabama's relationship with religion is one of the most defining features of its cultural character. The state sits squarely within the region known as the Bible Belt, and Christianity, particularly Baptist, Methodist, and Evangelical Protestant traditions, permeates virtually every aspect of Alabama's social and civic life. Churches are not merely places of worship in Alabama. They are community centers, political organizing spaces, social networks, and sources of identity. The Black church in particular has been one of the most powerful institutions in Alabama's history, serving as the organizational backbone of the civil rights movement and the spiritual anchor of Black communities through centuries of oppression. The relationship between faith and public life in Alabama is complex, contested, and absolutely central to understanding the state. Fact number 95. Alabama's landscape has inspired artists, writers, photographers, and filmmakers for generations. And the state has developed a growing arts and culture scene that extends well beyond the literary giants of Monroeville. Birmingham has a thriving arts district, a world-class symphony orchestra, and a museum of art with a permanent collection spanning 5,000 years of human creativity. The Alabama Shakespeare Festival, based in Montgomery, is one of the largest Shakespeare festivals in the world and draws audiences from across the country to its productions. Huntsville's arts community has grown dramatically alongside its technology sector, and the Gulf Coast has long attracted painters and photographers drawn to its extraordinary light and color. Alabama's creative culture is quieter and less internationally celebrated than its history, but it is rich, genuine, and steadily growing. Fact number 96. The state of Alabama has made significant investments in healthcare infrastructure over recent decades. And the University of Alabama at Birmingham Health System has emerged as one of the premier academic medical centers in the southeastern United States. UAB Hospital is consistently ranked among the best hospitals in the country and serves as the primary referral center for patients throughout Alabama and neighboring states. The UAB Comprehensive Cancer Center is one of only a handful of National Cancer Institute-designated comprehensive cancer centers in the South, conducting cutting-edge research into cancer prevention, detection, and treatment. The medical and biotechnology sector has become one of Birmingham's most important economic engines, employing thousands of highly skilled workers and attracting hundreds of millions of dollars in federal research funding annually. Fact number 97. Alabama's state park system, which encompasses more than 20 parks spread across the full geographic range of the state, represents one of its most underappreciated public treasures. From DeSoto State Park on Lookout Mountain in the northeast, with its waterfalls and canyon overlooks, to Gulf State Park on the Gulf Coast, with its sugar-white beaches and fishing pier, to Oak Mountain State Park near Birmingham, the largest state park in Alabama, covering nearly 10,000 acres of forested ridges and valleys. The system offers outdoor recreation opportunities that are genuinely world-class. For Alabamians looking to hike, fish, kayak, camp, or simply sit quietly in a beautiful natural setting, the state parks are an accessible and affordable gateway to some of the finest landscapes in the American South. Fact number 98. Alabama has demonstrated a remarkable capacity for reinvention over the course of its history. The Birmingham of today, a city of medicine, technology, finance, and the arts, bears almost no resemblance to the coal-stained steel town of the early 20th century or the racially segregated city that Bull Connor patrolled in the early 1960s. Huntsville, once a small cotton market town, is now one of the fastest growing and most economically dynamic cities in the South, driven by aerospace, defense technology, and a highly educated workforce. Mobile has revitalized its historic downtown and waterfront. The Gulf Coast communities have built a thriving year-round tourism economy. None of these transformations happened without struggle, setback, and hard choices. But they are real. And they speak to a resilience in Alabama's character that runs as deep as anything else in its story. Fact number 99. Alabama's natural environment faces significant challenges in the 21st century that deserve honest acknowledgement alongside the celebration of its extraordinary biodiversity. Climate change is increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events, heavier rainfall, more severe droughts, stronger hurricanes along the Gulf Coast, and increasingly unpredictable tornado seasons. Water quality in many of Alabama's rivers and streams has been degraded by industrial runoff, agricultural pollution, and inadequate wastewater treatment infrastructure, threatening the freshwater fish and mussel species that make the state's waterways so biologically remarkable. Coastal erosion and sea level rise are affecting the Gulf Coast shoreline. These are not abstract future threats. They are present realities that Alabama's scientists, policymakers, and communities are actively grappling with varying degrees of urgency and commitment. Fact number 100. And here we are, the final fact. Fact number 100. Alabama's official state motto, as we noted at the very beginning of this journey, is Audemus jura nostra defendere. We dare defend our rights. It is a phrase that has meant very different things to different people across the full sweep of Alabama's history. It has been invoked to justify secession and the defense of slavery. It has been invoked to defend segregation. And it has also been invoked, quietly, bravely, at enormous personal cost, by the men and women who sat at lunch counters and marched across bridges and refused to give up their seats on city buses, defending their rights against a system that denied them at every turn. The motto belongs to all of them. It belongs to the Cherokee and Creek farmers who defended their rights to their ancestral land and lost. It belongs to the enslaved people who resisted their bondage in every way they could. It belongs to the scientists in Huntsville who defended humanity's right to reach beyond the sky. It belongs to the writers and musicians who defended the right of the Southern experience, in all its complexity and contradiction, to be told honestly and completely. Alabama is not a simple place. It has never been a simple place. But it is a place that has mattered. That has shaped the American story in ways both terrible and transcendent, and that continues to wrestle with its past and reach towards something better. That, more than any single fact, is what Alabama is, and that is all 100 facts about the state of Alabama. We have traveled a long road together in this video, from the ancient Mississippian mounds at the bend of the Black Warrior River to the gleaming steel of a Saturn V rocket on a launch pad in Florida, built by minds trained in Huntsville. From the Trail of Tears to the Edmund Pettus Bridge. From the longleaf pine forests that once covered the continent to the white sand beaches of the Gulf. From the cotton fields of the Black Belt to the automobile plants that now hum along its edges. From the voice of Hank Williams carrying heartbreak across a crackling radio signal to the quiet, fierce courage of 4 little girls who went to Sunday school one morning and never came home. Alabama is a state that demands something of the people who engage with it honestly. It asks you to hold contradiction, beauty and ugliness, heroism and cruelty, progress and resistance, all in the same hand at the same time. It is not a place that lets you look away, and that is ultimately one of the things that makes it so important to understand. Whether you are an Alabamian watching this and feeling a complicated mix of pride and pain, which is probably the most honest way to feel about this state, or whether you are someone who came into this video knowing almost nothing about Alabama and are leaving it with 100 reasons to think more carefully about what this corner of America has contributed to the national story, I hope this series has been worth your time. The United States is not a simple country. It was built by complicated people in complicated circumstances, and every state carries its own version of that complexity. Alabama's version is more dramatic, more painful, and more redemptive than most. And it is not finished yet. The story is still being written by the engineers at Marshall Space Flight Center, by the students at Tuskegee and UAB and Auburn and Alabama, by the farmers and the fishermen and the musicians and the lawyers and the activists and the ordinary people who get up every morning and try to make their corner of Alabama a little bit better than they found it. If this video left you with something, a fact you didn't know, a name you want to look up, a place you want to visit, a piece of history you want to understand more deeply, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. Please like this video if you found value in it. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dives like this one. We have videos planned on states, cities, historical events, and remarkable people from every corner of America and the wider world. Leave a comment below and tell us which of the 100 facts surprised you the most. Or which part of Alabama's story you think deserves even more attention than we were able to give it here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being curious, and we will see you in the next one.